What is this guy doing? Brother, why are you sideways? Yup, dead. Episode Revenant has ended up bringing several changes to the Destiny sandbox in terms of abilities and exotics. Specifically, we're talking about Titans. Now, in the previous episode, Titans had Twilight Arsenal to fall back on as the top dog in damage, and it did do quite a bit of damage. But going from Echoes to Revenant, we've lost both artifact mods, which helped the damage of Twilight Arsenal in Expanding Abyss, but also Twilight Arsenal itself took a reduction in damage too. Now this episode, Arc Titans decided to pick up the ball and are now the ones receiving a huge buff in both the exotic department and the artifact slot. Now, I do want to note that currently, Arc Titan with Thunder Crash is bugged and doing more damage than intended. However, even when Bungie does fix this, it's still going to be a monster build for DPS just because of one change that happened to the exotic chest piece, Curious of the Falling Star. Now, what made Curious really good previously was that it greatly increased your Thunder Crash damage, and it still does do that. However, there's a bonus perk now which states melee final blows while amplified grants you super energy, and it grants you a lot more than you think. As you'll see in the background footage throughout this video, I get giant chunks of super energy back anytime that I use my melee on ads. I'll use my Thunder Crash, and then start meleeing things, and next thing you know, I'll have another super back within 30 seconds. Now, besides Curious, there are a couple of things that help you out in this scenario as well. First, obviously, you need to become amplified. You can easily do this either through arc weapons, such as Indented Kindness, or using your abilities, such as your Aspect with Knockout, which will just automatically make you amplified when you're using your melee, or any other method that you want to use to get amplified. But once you do, then you use your other aspect, which is, of course, Consecration, the very, very unique aspect that every Titan uses, I know. But in this case, Consecration nukes everything on the ground, and then also will give you a ton of super energy because that is a melee kill, thus your super bar is going to grow. We can take it a little further though. In our helmet slot, there's a mod called Hands On, which states gain bonus super energy on melee kills. Throw a couple of these suckers on and combine it with what I just mentioned earlier, and you'll be set for life on super energy. Now with that out of the way, let's get to the thing that everyone wants to know about. Let's get to the damage. This setup is going to be on Arc Prismatic Titan, and the #1 goal of this build is going to be doing as much burst damage as humanly possible within the shortest amount of time. Now, we already know what exotic we're using, Curious of the Falling Star, but let's talk about the weapons that are going to go along with it. For this build, given that the current episode is very GL focused, we're going with a couple of GLs in our loadout, and in particular on a heavy slot, 2 of the newest GLs added to the game. In this footage, you're going to be seeing Bittersweet, which is the latest Arc GL added to the game that you can farm through Onslaught and Tonics, and then we have Chill Inhibitor, which is the newest Dungeon GL from the latest Vespers Host Dungeon. Both of these GLs are amazing and will do fantastic in any DPS loadout. But with this particular build, it gets even sillier. On one side, you have Chill Inhibitor, which is a rapid-fire frame that can roll Cascade and Envious, not both together, but in the third slot if you want, depending on your preference. And you could also pair this with Irukanji, which is a kinetic slot Stasis Sniper that can synergize with having 1 Surge on your boots instead of 2 copies for, you know, like 1 Stasis, 1 Solar if you're using Ikelos, or Kinetic with Supremacy. Now, on the flip side, you have the other GL, which is Bittersweet, which also can roll Envious Arsenal Bait and Switch. It also rolls Envious Arsenal Cascade, which is slightly worse, but still very good. Now, this GL, you can take advantage of with your entire build, synergizing with Arc, and then optimize with Cloud Strike in your energy slot to not only get off quick shots to get your Cascade to proc on the Stasis GL, but also with this version and this GL, you can go in with your regular Bait and Switch loadout, get your GLs off, then switch back to Cloud Strike to get a couple of shots off to get that Lightning Strike going, and then go back to Bittersweet, and then you'll have a full mag to shoot again. The main difference is going to come down to 2 things. Preference, and then depending on what boss fights you're going into. If you're going into a boss fight that's very, very short, then the Cascade variant will perform better because you can get many more shots out than the other versions. Now, if you're going into a prolonged damage phase, something that's super long like the Witness, or Oryx, or the Corrupted Puppeteer, then you can use any of the GLs because you're going to blow through all of your shots either way. But I will say that for most people, I think the Envious Arsenal role in that scenario is better just because you can freely rotate between all of your weapons without having to actually reload, given all the utilities that you have this season with the artifact and all that. Now let's talk about the ability side of the build besides the actual super. So like I mentioned earlier, our aspects in this are going to be Knockout and Consecration. In the other ability departments, we have Frenzy Blade in our melee because you get 3 copies of these, and also you can use the actual Frenzy Blade melee to sever and additionally apply Radiant to yourself via the Facet of Dawn fragment. And of course, aside from that, you can use these melees to Consecration Slam for just big boosts of your super energy. In the grenade slot, there's a couple of choices here. So the first choice is Suppressor Grenade. The main purpose of this grenade is to utilize this as a last resort for a free reload that's going to count with one of our fragments that I'm going to talk about in a second. On the flip side, you have Glacier Grenade to use for this to apply a stasis debuff to a boss, which again will tie into another fragment that we're going to talk about now. 4 fragments, we have 5 of them going from left to right. First is the staple in every Prismatic build, Facet of Protection. When you're surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage, and when you're transcended, the effect is increased. Pretty straightforward. Number 2 is Facet of Dawn. Like I alluded to earlier, when you use your melees, then you will become Radiant, because once you pump anything with your melee, you instantly apply Radiant to yourself, which will then give you more outgoing damage to your weapons. Number 3 is going to be Facet of Command. Now, traditionally, this is not really used in Titan DPS builds, at least not in the past. But in this particular scenario, this actually can be utilized when you go into a damage phase. For example, you go into a damage phase, you pop Prismatic, you pop your super, get all your ammo out, and eventually your Prismatic will run out. When it does run out, assuming that you still have some ammo remaining in your GL, you can pump the rest of your GL in your mag at the boss, and then throw your Suppressor Grenade into a boss, which will then auto-reload your GL instantly, giving you another 8 shots, assuming you're using the Cascade version rather than Envious Arsenal. The 4th fragment is Facet of Ruin. This, realistically, is only really here if you're using that Glacier Grenade that I mentioned earlier, and that's about it. You can definitely swap this out for literally anything else that you want, and be totally fine. For example, you could also put the fragment for Facet of Dominance in this slot, and then have your Void Grenade, the suppressor, weaken a target if you didn't already have enough weakened sources, or you could run a Pulse Grenade, and then your Arc Grenade will jolt them for extra damage. And last but certainly not least, the best fragment in this kit, Facet of Courage. Your Arc, Solar, and Void abilities deal increased damage to targets afflicted with darkness debuffs, in this case, the Arc part for your Thunder Crash. So ideally, you would utilize this with either Frenzied Blade, which does Sever, or your Glacier Grenade, which would then apply a Stasis debuff, or even something as simple as putting on Riptide and hitting Chokelip on any boss, followed by your Thunder Crash, and bam, you have free bonus damage on your T-Crash. Speaking of bonus damage to your T-Crash, let's talk about the artifact and tonic. Specifically, I want to talk about 2 artifacts. The first one is going to be Conductive Cosmic Crystal, which says that your Arc abilities, Void abilities, and weapons with Dark Ether, blah blah blah, we don't care about that part, gain bonus damage to targets that are affected by a Stasis debuff. Stasis that I just mentioned previously. And then the boost, which is the tonic, for this states that you can increase that bonus damage to combatants that are affected by a Stasis debuff. So again, this will also pump your Thunder Crash for even more damage. And then the other one I want to talk about is Concussive Reload, one that everyone is familiar with, I'm sure. This one states that using a grenade launcher, any grenade launcher, to damage a boss, a champion, or just break a combatant's shield will then weaken them. Then, there's a boost from a tonic that states using grenade launchers to damage bosses, champions, or break their shields will automatically reload your stowed weapons. So, this in particular is really good with Envious Arsenal GL builds because you can rotate between your heavy GL and then a GL in a different slot, for example, Lost Signal in the top kinetic slot, or the new Void one from the Vespersos dungeon. That way, you can keep rotating between all of your weapons and then have all of them have ammo at all times without having to actually manually reload any of them. Lastly, I want to talk about rotations a little bit because there's some trivia or nuances that people might not know about going into this. So, first thing I want to note is that the Concussive Reload perk that you'd be using for your auto reloads, that actually has a cooldown and won't just trigger every single time you're trying to use it. So keep that in mind. It's kind of like Demolitionist, where it has a small internal cooldown, but it's much longer than Demolitionist. So in case you're like, hey, why is my stuff not getting reloaded half the time? That is why. Another thing to keep in mind is that Titans don't have a free auto reload dodge like Warlocks and Hunters do. For example, Hunters have the literal reload dodge to get free ammo back. Titans normally have something like that, other than the scenario that I mentioned with Fast Enough Command. So, if you're using a Cascade setup, you're gonna have to manually reload at some point in your rotation, so you have to keep that in mind as well. So with that said, ideally, you want to start out your rotations in one of two ways. The first way is going to be light up a boss with a debuff, and then stasis, and then thunder crash them to get your T-Crash out of the way early. The main benefit to this is that some boss fights last so long that you'll be able to get 2 T-Crashes back because of what I mentioned earlier with the melees on Curious now, giving you giant chunks of super energy, and also picking up orbs from your teammates. And the other opening option is going to be utilizing your weapons first, and then putting in the Thunder Crash at some point in the damage phase later on. So for me personally, when I started off most damage phases, I would go off with my weapons first. In this case, it would be Lost Signal, and then in my energy slot, I would have a Rapid Fire Sniper, such as Ikelos, because Rapid Fire Snipers just, well, rapidly get the shots in to proc Cascade, and then I'm on my way to my GL. You could use a regular sniper. It would be 2 shots with a regular, like, Adaptive Sniper, and then it would be 3 shots with a Rapid Sniper, whether it's Ikelos, Supremacy, Irukandji, and so on. So assuming you started with a weapon rotation, you went with your kinetic, your energy, and then your heavy, and if you have Cascade up, you use up all your ammo, and then you manually reload because you still have bait and switch going, so you want to use that timer and get more damage in. You have a second mag go off from your GL, and at this point, you can incorporate the Thunder Crash now into the boss. Then, once your T-Crash animation is done, swap back to your kinetic, again in this case, Lost Signal, apply it to the boss for tick damage, switch back to your sniper, get another 3 crits, assuming you're using a rapid sniper, and then back to the heavy you go, another 8 shots with Cascade, manually reload again, and then get those mags off too. And don't forget, before any of these damage phases start, you can pop Prismatic in order to give yourself a 5% damage boost to all of your weapons, and in the grand scheme of things, that's going to add up to a lot given how many bullets you're going to use. All in all, once you get more familiar with the rotations and the setup with the build, you can pump out anywhere between 3 to 8 million damage on bosses depending on which boss it is and how much health that boss has. For example, the new Kurt the Puppeteer boss, you can crank out 6, 7, 8 million on that boss in one phase if everything goes smoothly. Anyway, that's all I have for today. The dim link for this build will be in the description below if you want to go down there and follow the socials while you're at it to use the build. And in the meantime, I will be also trying to do all raid bosses versus this GL setup, so stay tuned for that. But if you did enjoy the video, please consider subscribing today. It does help the channel grow and is much appreciated. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can leave a comment and a like down below. If you don't know what to leave as a comment, you can leave Titan OP as the comment. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.